There are truly some iconic duos out there. Sonny and Cher, Thelma and Louise, Trixie and Katya, the list could go on. But the duo I've heard about forever is Bonnie and Clyde. Before doing my research on this, I thought the couple had an affinity for robbing banks and causing mayhem. While this is accurate, it only scratches the surface of all the crazy shit these two were doing. Robbing funeral homes, running around with a gang, killing people. Y'all better buckle up because we are going on a wild ride. Here's a bit of backstory on our couple before they met each other. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born October 1st, 1910 in Rowena, Texas, and she was the middle child of 3 kids. They were able to live off of her father's job as a bricklayer. But when Bonnie was just a small child, he died unexpectedly. Bonnie's mother moved the family to their grandparents' home in West Dallas to a place called Cement City. Bonnie loved creative writing and poetry. She wrote it until the day she passed. However, Bonnie dropped out of high school her sophomore year to run away with her boyfriend, Roy Thornton. The two ended up marrying only a few days before her 16th birthday. And I think the reason Bonnie was attracted to Roy was, well, Roy was a bad boy. She liked him so much that she got a tattoo of 2 intertwined hearts. Inside each said Bonnie and Roy. Tattoos at this time were incredibly controversial, and if a woman had one, but Bonnie wasn't like other girls. She wanted to do things her way. She wasn't shy, and in fact, loved the attention. Sadly, Roy wouldn't be giving her much attention after a while because he was in jail a lot. He would get into trouble with the law and wouldn't see Bonnie for really long stints. The thing is, they never officially divorced. They just went their separate ways, and that was that. On the day Bonnie passed, she was still wearing the wedding ring Roy had given her. After their separation, Bonnie ended up moving back with her mother to Dallas, where she worked as a waitress at a local restaurant. And now a bit on our boy Clyde. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born on March 24th, 1909. He grew up in a really poor farming family based in Ellis County, Texas. Clyde's parents, Henry and Cumie, had 7 children. Clyde was number 5. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that the Barrow family was really poor. During the early 1920s, their family migrated to the slums of West Texas with nothing. They slept under a wagon until they saved up enough money to purchase a tent. This is the Great Depression time, so everyone and their dog felt the effects. There's no money, little to no food, a freaking dust bowl was going on. Things were not going well. Crime was poppin' at the time because when resources are scarce, you're gonna do whatever you can to survive and provide for your family. And as Clyde was growing up, he would be no stranger to run-ins with the law. Much like the rest of his fam bam. Yes, this was a criminal family affair. But when you have nothing to your name, you also have nothing to lose. So you go out and take it. There were more minor incidents, like when the cops tracked Clyde down because he never returned a rental vehicle. He was only 17 at the time. In another instance, he and his brother Buck got arrested for stealing turkeys, which, hey, Thanksgiving is gonna happen one way or another. This leads us to early January of 1930, when Bonnie and Clyde's paths finally collided. Clyde had small jobs here and there, but never managed to keep them. At this time, Clyde was staying with a friend who'd hurt her arm and needed help while she recovered. He went to drop her off at the house when he spotted Miss Bonnie Parker in the kitchen making hot chocolate. Even the very first accounts of their meeting said they couldn't take their eyes off each other. It was love at first sight. But like Bonnie's first relationship, Clyde wouldn't be around for very long. He was arrested for auto theft in March of 1930, just a couple of months after they first met. Stealing cars was like the major crime of this era. People figured out how to hotwire vehicles because now they were electric and cars would go missing all the time. But Bonnie really liked this guy. I mean, she was head over heels in love already. So she decided, you know what, I'm gonna get this guy out of jail. And that's exactly what she did. She smuggled Clyde a weapon during one of her visits, and that helped him escape. Sadly, Clyde was captured and brought back to jail, where he wouldn't be released until 2 years later. And his time in prison was genuinely horrifying. Some of this is difficult to hear, so you can skip ahead if you want to. But in summary, it was awful. This was the kind of place that made you do hard labor out in the fields for hours. The guards were abusive, and Clyde was a small guy that got picked on, to put it lightly. Trigger warning, SA. He was sexually assaulted multiple times as well. One of these times, he was so angry and fed up, he smashed in the skull of his perpetrator. It was the first time he had ever killed anyone before. Luckily for Clyde, one of his fellow inmates was already serving a life sentence and took the blame for this. And his mother had petitioned for his release, and this lined up perfectly with his toe injury. So Clyde was paroled and he met up with Bonnie ASAP, but he was never the same once he was released. Prison scarred him for life. This is when the gang really started. And this group was all up in everybody's business all the time, committing robberies at banks and small gas stations. They were in the papers all the freaking time. And most police officers only carried a pistol. In contrast, Clyde and the group carried freaking automatic weapons, most of which they stole at military armories. They could evade the police so easily by crossing state lines often. Because of this, they were only becoming more infamous. But Clyde had a much bigger plan than just robberies. He wanted to return to the prison that treated him like absolute garbage and free all the inmates. Bonnie was like, hell yeah, I hate that prison too, I want to help. So Bonnie and another crew member went to a hardware store to steal supplies and firearms. But the plan went awry, and they were captured and thrown in jail. During her quick vacation in jail, Bonnie wrote out 10 odes titled Poetry from Life's Other Side, and in this collection there was a poem called The Story of Suicide Sal. The story follows an innocent girl that's tricked into joining a life of crime by her boyfriend. Seems a little pointed there, huh, Bonnie? But the good news for Bonnie, the jury never actually indicted her, so she only had to serve a couple of months in jail. Whereas her accomplice in the robbery was tried, convicted, and put away for a hot minute. He never joined back up with Bonnie and Clyde's crew, and I gotta say, I really don't blame him. So with this little hiccup out of the way, Bonnie and Clyde were back on the road, ready to rob some more convenience stores. But this time, someone would lose their life. In April of 1932, they went to rob a store and ended up killing the owner with a firearm. The owner's wife was able to identify Clyde from police photos, even though he was only driving the getaway car. So Clyde was wanted for manslaughter, and he faced a fatal sentence if he was captured, which meant he and Bonnie were on the run from the law. But this didn't stop them from robbing. The next big event happened on August 5th while the crew drank moonshine at a dance. This was the Prohibition era where alcohol was illegal. If you're just out in the open passing a bottle around, you'd get in huge trouble. So the group was hanging out in the parking lot getting rowdy and drinking booze when two cops approached to stop them. The Barrow Gang opened fire on the officers, killing one and seriously wounding the other. They claimed the lives of 9 members of law enforcement during their run. One of Clyde's friends, a 16-year-old boy named W.D. Jones, joined the group on Christmas Eve, and they booked it out of Dallas. On Christmas Day, they stopped in a city called Temple, where Clyde and his teenage buddy took a man's life for his car. They used that state lines trick, and police couldn't follow them. Only a few weeks later, Clyde killed a police deputy when the Barrow Gang walked into a trap set up for another criminal. In March of that year, Clyde's brother, Buck, was released from prison after being pardoned. Buck and his wife, Blanche, met up with Bonnie and Clyde at a hideout in Missouri. Blanche was hoping that Buck wouldn't get caught up in a life of crime, but once they reached the hideout, every night was like a party. Even if they were living in a hideout, they weren't really hiding. They came and went from the house at all hours of the night, drinking, screaming, and playing card games. A group of officers approached the hideout, believing that a posse of bootleggers lived in the garage, and bullets started flying. Clyde, Buck, and W.D. Jones started letting loose, killing one officer and seriously wounding the others. Immediately, the group fled the hideout in Missouri and left all of their belongings behind. This included Buck's parole papers. He literally just got out of prison the month before, remember? A bunch of weapons, Bonnie's poetry, and a camera with lots of pictures. It was mostly photos of the group posing with weapons and pointing them menacingly at each other, smoking cigars, and just having a cute little criminal photo shoot. Once they got the pictures, the police sent them to the papers to print. Finally, the people could put a face to the name. These photos were front page news across the country immediately. The Barrow Gang was the hot topic, especially since the group included a woman. The group was getting even more publicity, so they had to work even harder to evade capture. They never stayed in one place for too long. Like this one time in June of 1933, their car flipped into a ravine and was set on fire. That and acid from an engine leak burned all down Bonnie's leg. Despite this horrible injury, the group was determined to make money moves. They traveled to so many states, taking pit stops at home to say hi to their relatives along the way. Blanche reserved a 1930s version of an Airbnb for 3 guests, but when 5 people showed up, the owner definitely noticed. It didn't help that they backed the car into the garage gangster style, so they were prepped and ready for a quick getaway. They also taped newspapers in the windows so no one could see inside. Bonnie would wear riding pants when she grabbed food for the group, but paid for 5 meals instead of 3 each time. These people loved the thrill of the chase. Sure, robbery is fun, but the possibility of getting caught is what makes it exciting. The owner was like, something seems fishy about those people. Could it be the Barrow Gang in our town? And he made a few calls to some shop owners and the police, who planned to approach their hideout. And if we've learned anything about these guys, it's that they love a showdown, mainly because they had excellent weapons. Although this one didn't go so well for Buck and Blanche. Buck took a bullet to the head. Blanche was partially blinded by glass fragments after a blast. But somehow, these crazy people evaded the law yet again. But people in the town noticed them immediately because people usually stare when you're covered in fluid. So the police surrounded the Barrow crew and started shooting. Bonnie Clyde and W.D. Jones escaped on foot, but Blanche was captured, and Buck took a bullet to the back and lost his life 6 days later. So after a few more months of robbing and slaying people across 5+ states, more and more people were determined to get Bonnie and Clyde. That's when they hired the best shot in Texas, Frank Hamer, a 20-year officer of the law with 53 criminal kills. Frank followed the Barrow Gang around for months, tracking their movements. Once he figured out that they were trying to cross state lines to evade police, he rounded up a posse to camp out along a rural road for a few days. And on May 23, 1934, it would be the end of Bonnie and Clyde. Frank and his posse hid and waited for the Barrow Gang along a road in Louisiana. Finally, they jumped out and unloaded over 100 rounds into the couple's car and killed them where they sat. When Frank gave his little interview, he said, "I hate to bust the cap on a woman, especially when she's sitting down. However, if it wouldn't have been her, it would have been us." Sadly, Bonnie and Clyde weren't buried together like they wanted to be, but they are both buried in Dallas, not too far from each other. And that, my friends, is the story of Bonnie and Clyde. What did you think? Did you learn some new things? Because I know I did. Thanks for watching Killer Bites. I'm Brandi. I'll see you next time.